If you or someone you know struggles with addiction, stay right here for the Recovery Boys. Lewis Finch and Macon Moy discuss alcoholism, drug addiction, co-occurring disorders, and life in recovery. And now, here's Lewis and Macon.
I'm Macon.
I'm Lewis.
And we are
the Recovery Boys.
So this week, we have been blessed, fortunate to have hosted a panel of law school deans here in the Triangle. Lewis, we had North Carolina Central, Campbell, and UNC Chapel Hill.
The deans were here, and the topic was obviously about the law schools themselves and trying to, what do they do with their students who realize they've got mental health and addiction issues.
Right, and so, I think the really good conversation, and you guys will see it, it'll be our Recovery Boys episode this week. The really good conversation was, I was impressed, enthused that the deans are aware. It's not something that they're waiting for a student to show up. They're trying to get in front of the conversation.
Yes.
And so they have these initiatives, which were really nice to hear about, of trying to start to promote wellness, and to try and explain to their law students that it's not just about how many hours you bill, but how much you enjoy your life.
Well, if you think about it, and this was pointed out to us early on, that you've got these, most kids who go to law school are high-functioning high school students,
right,
top of their classes. They go on to really nice colleges and are high-functioning college students. And when you get out, they decide they want to go to law school, so they end up at these law schools, and all of a sudden they're now one of many very smart people.
Right.
And it can take some of them, they can make them veer off the path, start developing addiction issues and mental health issues where they never had it before.
That's right. And I thought you one of the points that you brought up were performance enhancing pharmaceuticals.
Right.
Which, let's face it, law students are always, they're overworked, and, stimulant use amongst students is not unusual.
Right, and then you start using those, and then you have to go to sleep at some point, so you start drinking to anesthetize your brain, and it's kind of a cycle. And again, as some of the comments were made, at some point it becomes the issue. And what they're trying to do on their end is to get, as you said, get ahead of this before it becomes a huge deal and throws them off a ledge.
Yeah. And so I think that, for us in this space, people that work in this space, if we could ever get to the point where we're not always reacting to a crisis,
correct,
and get in front of the conversation. It's like one of the guys that I work with, he drives me crazy because he calls me after he's messed up, and I told him, I said, do me a favor. I said, before you mess up, call me. I said, maybe we can lessen the damage.
Well, but you know as well as I, he doesn't want to, he knows what you're going to say,
That's
so
right.
He doesn't want to hear it. But to your point, yes, it would be nice to be able to get ahead of some of this, so at least some folks won't have to go what we went through.
That's right. And your point about using Adderall and then you have to go to sleep, at some point it will, as every story of alcoholism and drug addiction plays out, you quit using because you want to, and you start using because you got to, and then you're down the rabbit hole, and it can get to be really complicated, especially if you have the addictive gene, or if all of a sudden things start to spiral out of control, and you figure, well, I'm gonna use more because if I use more, maybe all this will go away, and of course all you're doing is increasing the problem. So. It was neat.
Well, we wanted to have a lead into the portion with the law dean. So
correct. So
just sit back and relax, and hopefully you'll learn something from this, right?
You will, absolutely, you will.
Welcome everyone, and I'm so happy to be here. Bob mentioned the tragedy earlier this week, but mental health and wellness in the legal profession is a top priority every single day. so many lawyers and judges whose names you don't recognize struggle and sometimes will lose the struggle because they're not getting help. So I'm really glad to be here today, especially with the deans of 2 of our area law schools, because really reaching students is the way to start.
Three.
Oh gosh, I'm so sorry. You didn't have a name tag on. I am so sorry.
We're in Durham.
Please.
Not North Raleigh.
No. Please forgive me.
No worries.
Since Mayor O'Neill left the deanship there, we've had a pandemic. And so I haven't had the honor of meeting you, and I'm so sorry.
Oh, no problem.
Thank you. And yes, it's been a whole pandemic, so I apologize. Anyway, I'm just going to get right into some questions because we want to hear from the 3 law school deans about what you're seeing. How widespread in your law school is the challenge of students on the cusp of or who've already developed mental issues and substance abuse problems? And I guess I'll also say it doesn't require a psychiatric diagnosis for someone to benefit from getting help. So are you seeing students struggle, I would ask? And
Well, yes. I'm not sure how to answer this other than anecdotally because I don't really have any sort of empirical tool that's unique to my law school to measure mental health. But nationally, we do have one great empirical study that was done of law students. It's 3 or 4 years old now, and it was called the Survey of Student Well-Being that the ABA did. And it found that 1/4 of law students reported binge drinking within 2 or more times in the prior 2 weeks, that 1/3 reported using marijuana, cocaine, or prescription drugs without a prescription in the prior year, and 1/3 screened positive for moderate or severe anxiety, and 1/6 screened positive for depression, and those seem really like alarming numbers. I've always taken them a little bit at face value. Binge drinking is defined as 5 drinks for a guy, 4 for a girl within a 2-hour period. If you do that a couple of times on a Saturday night, I'm not sure that absolutely impairs your ability to be successful in law school. Marijuana is now legal in 1/3 of the states in the country, so I suspect a lot of law students partake. And again, I'm not sure that necessarily impairs their ability. And moderate anxiety is just a part of law school. Our pedagogy, frankly, is designed to produce moderate anxiety in many ways. So I think the real issue is, how do we find those students who have plunged into such severe anxiety and depression that it really is impairing their performance? I don't think it's as high as these numbers, but there's a number, and I think that I've looked at a lot of solutions to this. For me, the antidote has been, which we finally have this year, is to have a trusted, respected, available mental health counselor on premises at the law school all the time, who the students know about, who they trust, and who they can get to easily. Other mental health services are out there and they've always been available, but law students are busy, they're crunched, and they often have a hard time just going through the mechanics of reaching those other services. But so I do now have a wonderful counselor, and she is slammed. She's booked day and night.
And Dean Lewis, I know at Central, Brett Bowers has been there.
We've always had one. Thank you for catching that.
Took a while.
Well, I know Brett through the BarCare board, and he's been there since before the pandemic. But you became the dean of a law school during a pandemic.
Yeah, and I think because of the pandemic, I think there's a lot of anxiety. But not just the pandemic, it's so much else that's happening in the country. with the political divide and our, we recently had the bomb threats at the HBCU law school, so that heightens anxiety. Brett has done a wonderful job. He actually tracks the numbers and he makes a monthly report as to, and so I think our numbers, when you gave the numbers in study, that doesn't surprise me. I'm sure our numbers are pretty close to that because that study was taken before the pandemic, and so now we have the pandemic and we have students who are out zoomed out with the virtual learning. They're not able to socialize with one another as much, and I think that heightens anxiety. So I think that drinking, we don't permit it because we don't do group gatherings at the law school. So I'm sure they're figuring out other ways to do it. And it's probably even more dangerous because now they're doing it solo, maybe because they're not these gatherings where they can partake. So we've tried to come up with things to help them be able to socialize with one another. Brett does Awareness Wednesday where he's able to connect with the students, knowing that they don't have to have a clinical diagnosis or a clinical permit just to talk and chat. The faculty tries to stay engaged. I think students who request accommodations, a lot of those are now going away from learning disabilities to anxiety and other psychological aspects of things. So I think that's indicated to us because that number has grown. So I think that's indicating that anxiety and that psychological pressures down.
So just like students who have accommodations for, learning disabilities, and some of the most successful lawyers in the world have overcome some learning disabilities. But I wasn't aware of mental health accommodations. It's really great to hear that's recognized as just something that's there for students. And is for HBCUs and law schools, are there particular difficulties in this pandemic and in this political climate that our other two deans may not see as much of?
Definitely. Whenever there's a shooting of an unarmed person of color, that's anxiety. Racism, is now a mental health issue, and it's anxiety. We have one of the most diverse law schools in the country. Our students get along regardless of their race or gender, any of those issues. So it's difficult for them to understand all the hate and divisiveness, especially when, like I said before, HBCUs are getting bomb threats that we're forced to evacuate the campus. That's stressful. So I think those are the unique challenges. There are only 6 HBCU law schools, and I always feel like you're constantly being attacked. I think it's difficult for the faculty and staff, and especially the students.
Well, and when I was in law school, there were very few students of color in my class. When I say very few, I got to be good friends with some of my classmates of color, but that must be a different challenge in law schools that are not HBCU law schools, particularly, I guess, if you're having classes that are taught on Zoom where people aren't together in a room. Does that create a greater opportunity for, isolation, but also conflicts that are difficult to navigate because the students and the professors aren't together? And I'm going to ask Dean Brinkley from UNC, who was one of the brightest classmates I had there.
There is no doubt that the remote learning environment has been deleterious to the mental health of our students, just period. There's absolutely no question about it. This is a people profession, and going to law school is a social experience. It has to be a social experience to be meaningful, and our students have been deprived of a social experience now for the better part of 2 years. Even when we go to class in person and we're wearing masks, we don't experience the full social experience because we don't see the faces of those that we're learning with. I petitioned our central administration to let our faculty teach without masks if they were fully vaccinated and boosted and so forth, and that's not allowed. So
Even with plexiglass.
even with
Which is
whatever
what we do.
and so we're a lot better off now than we were last year. And I appreciate Rich laying out some of the data that you did. I'd like to sort of approach the question from a little bit different angle, if it's okay, and that is just to say, I think we have to think about who law students are when they come to us. These are people who have lived their lives on very clear paths that have had very clear forks in the road. And they have always taken the right fork in the road. They did well in high school to get into a good college. They did well in college to get into a good law school. And life has been a series of successes, by and large. And they get to law school and they are, frankly, to some degree, addicted to the praise of other people because that is all they have ever had in their lives so far. And suddenly they're put in an environment where, as I like to tell the first years when they first come in, I hate to tell you all this, but only 10% of you are going to be in the top 10% of the class. And I then tell them, frankly, it doesn't matter a hill of beans. It'll matter in terms of your first job, maybe, a little bit. But 5 years after you're gone, what's going to matter is what you can do for that client. And all of us, I bet, can attest to friends who may have, not graduated and may have graduated in the bottom 20% of the class, who've been the most highly successful lawyers that we could possibly know because the world has seen things in them that we were not equipped to measure. And I try to be very candid with my students. We are not capable of measuring everything that is going to make you a great lawyer in this world.
Right.
Please believe me. And you know what? They still don't believe me. Because they're living in this world that is the world that they're used to. And getting them out of that is something that we really do struggle with. Like Rich, we have a full-time counselor. She is way overbooked. I think I could clone her twice and that 2 other people would be fully booked at all times. What those encounters really look like, I don't know because they are confidential. And that's part of the point. Students have to have someone they can come and talk to who they feel has no possible say over the direction of their lives or their careers. So
right.
I have no idea what goes on. I think each student is permitted up to, is it 8, Kelly, meetings with our counselor? Right. And so students can have a rather somewhat extended experience with this person is a licensed social worker, a trained counselor.
Yeah.
But again, I could have 2 more, and they'd be absolutely full. And I guess the last thing I'll say that maybe jumps to one of the other questions is I've really tried to encourage our faculty to be open with students about their own mental health challenges. And I have been candid with students about my mental health challenges.
Yeah.
To try to destigmatize the seeking of aid.
Well, we're old-fashioned at Campbell, so we still grade to 2 decimal points. And so we have pretty good data on the actual effect the pandemic has had on performance of our students. And last year, we gave students the option of attending in person or attending virtually. And in the fall, it was pretty even because the folks who attended virtually really had a pretty good reason for doing it. The spring, not so much. We had a lot of students who saw some loopholes in our system, I think, and mama had a beach house or daddy had a mountain house and you could go live there and go to law school, and it seemed to work fine. And in the spring, that group fell off the cliff. They had an average GPA 3 points lower than the students who attended in person.
So
and
affluence
didn't get grades.
affluence is insulating, and people who are the most affluent have the most insulation from.
They do, but they didn't do very well.
Well, I'm saying they
yeah.
have insulation from getting help because they're not held accountable.
But I think that has driven us to being back in seat as quickly and as often as we possibly can be. And my professors are all teaching in person now. They are unmasked. We do have plexiglass shields that go from the podium up to the ceiling that they have to stay behind. If they move out, they have to put their mask on. But it's gone much better. But I want to follow up with what Martin said about what sorts of things your counselors are seeing, because again, it's all confidential and I don't know individual stories, but I know broad themes. And one of the things mine tell me is that surprised at how many students she sees that are really bringing to her issues that predate law school. Their family trauma, their chronic pain, their family dislocations, their relationship issues, that more than just the anxiety and depression generated by law school, she's really dealing with very serious issues that these students bring to her. And I think as we diversified our student body, we've increased the profile of folks who come to law school. Mm-hmm. We're getting people from lots of different backgrounds, some of whom had very hard childhoods. And those come, and for some of these students, this is the first really accessible free therapy they've ever had. So they're trying to work that through.
And it sounds like students are self-reporting and they're seeking help. I want to follow up and ask about the Wellness Wednesdays at Central, because wellness is a term that has been used more and more often in the last few years, and which I think is good. The concept being, it doesn't work to say, hey, you might have a problem, maybe you're not going to be in the top 10% of the class, or whatever, and instead saying, how would you like to be even better than you already are? But how does that work at Central, and do you find that students who might not ordinarily seek help come to it because of that program?
If Brett could speak to it, if you don't mind.
Sure. So one idea is this, and we have some outreach people here at the center here, right? So we go out in front of different audiences, right? That makes the services that we offer them more accessible, lowers barriers to service. So in a sense, that's one big function of something like a Wellness Wednesday, where you have a fully accessible space, and it also comes packaged in this sort of positive psychology message that feels like, oh, I want to be part of that, but it can also be a gateway into the help getting.
And we think of wellness broadly, so we do not just mental health issues, but financial time management, financial literacy, because we find that a lot of those things are really pressure. Like, you can't pay your bills because you spent all your loan check, or you can't manage your time, so you get behind. So we try, and we think that all impacts wellness. So, and we have a life coach in addition to a counselor that has been really helping people organize their life. So that seems to be, that takes some of the pressure off.
And are classes at Central in person now? And is everyone masked?
Yeah, we have, everybody is masked, and we didn't give people the option. What we did was, our required courses and our bar courses are in person. The only thing that's online are like seminars and electives. But everybody else is in person.
Your Honor, if I can interject.
Yes.
I have an interesting, in hearing the deans discuss this, it reminded me, I used to work for a residential treatment program. And it was interesting that when the families would bring their loved ones in to see us, they would comment about the fact that they were here for an addiction, the primary addiction folks. They would always talk about the fact that their loved ones had this underlying issue. We call them co-occurring disorders. Brett's familiar with them, like depression, anxiety. It sounds to me like the students are coming to you for help with those things, or at least they're more readily coming to you for help with the mental health issues. Are they coming to you also for addiction issues, alcoholism and drug addiction? Are you seeing as much of that?
Not much. I asked my
Not
counselor
aware.
that, and she says she hasn't seen a single student who's come to her complaining about an addiction issue. And that just may be because people with addiction issues
Don't know they have.
don't let anybody know about it. I'm not sure, but I was curious about that and specifically asked her, and she said in a couple of years, the addiction, the binge, the narcotics have not been anything that people have brought to her.
Well, the reason I asked the question, as we do at Wellwyn, we treat executives, professionals, and their families, and some of our clients have been attorneys, and they suffer from the same mental health issues that everybody else does, and they use alcohol and drugs to obviously
Right.
cope with. And I'm just, it's interesting to me that parents would come to us at the time I was with the residential program, and actually people here do the same thing. They'll go, well, I have, my excuse for drinking or taking drugs is X. And you don't,
Right,
it's like,
right.
which one of those do you treat? Well, you obviously have to treat them both at the same time, but which is more of an emergency factor? Which one do you have to address before something really, really bad's gonna happen? Because as you know, and we actually, it's interesting, we have a current client as a law student right now who is on hiatus. And what this particular person was telling me was that they're finding that a lot of the students are starting with, they're finding cocaine eventually. Cocaine has actually become a drug that seems to be having a
Comeback.
Recurrence,
right? And it starts, however, with drugs like Adderall, Vyvanse. I don't know if they're even prescribing Ritalin anymore, but because of all of the studying that has to be done, that you have to stay awake to do all this stuff, and I'm just wondering, are you seeing any of this?
Well, I'll comment, and Kelly Podger-Smith, my associate dean, might have a comment on this too. So I think there's two pieces. One that we have to be just reminded of factually, which is, to my knowledge, I don't have a single student under the age of 21. We are not in loco parentis to these students. They are adults in the eyes of the law. And so what they do on their own is to some extent veiled, from us. Now that being said, a lot of our students will, participate in sort of group social activities. And I think we do sometimes hear reports of what happens in those settings. And those will come back, and we have members of our student affairs staff who address those and deal with those, particularly if we think that they are headed towards a need for some sort of intervention that's going to interfere with their ability to take the bar and practice law. Because each of us, at least to the extent that our students want to practice law in North Carolina, one of the unique features of the North Carolina licensure process that is not true of most states is we have to sign an individual certification for every student who take the North Carolina bar exam. We have to certify that we believe that person is worthy of a position of trust and can represent a client.
Could be a powerful tool in a conversation
And
with an errant student.
I have refused, there are students I have refused to certify on various grounds because I was concerned about those issues. Not very many, but there have been some. And I make it very clear to our students that I will not hesitate to invoke that.
If I can follow up just on that point, without going into too much detail about students, that unique provision of North Carolina bar licensure process has, at least in ancient history, when I applied for admission to the bar, there was a question on the application, have you ever received any counseling? And if you answered yes, that was a red flag for concern about your moral fitness to be placed in a position of trust. Can you speak to how that has changed? And if you have a student who is struggling with mental illness, is that a reason that you would have any hesitancy to sign off on their fitness?
So I'll see if I can quote myself almost directly. We had a conversation with a group of students back, I don't know, in the fall, I guess, sometime, Kelly, where a community meeting around wellness issues, and it was after there had been a suicide on campus at UNC Chapel Hill that you all probably know a lot about. And there were a number of students there, and I told them about the certification process that we go through, and said to them that if it came to my attention that a student had a mental health issue and had sought assistance for that, I would consider that a plus in their application for to take the bar, and would view them all the more highly. Not that I necessarily would have not signed off on them anyway, but anyone who has gone to actually seek help, as far as I'm concerned, is on the road to making the right decisions. That's who I want to certify.
But Kelly can probably cite the exact rule, but we work very hard with the Board of Law Examiners here to make sure that episodic counseling does not have to be disclosed. Because it was such a deterrent when I started as dean. Students just would not go see a counselor because the bar was very ambivalent about the extent of disclosure you had to make in order to avoid a character and fitness examination. And Kelly, isn't that right? And don't they call it episodic counseling or some language like that?
They do. This gentleman tells me that if I speak, I have to go up there with y'all. So I'm trying to. So yes, they're doing a great job, and it's the language now is about severe impairment, and I think it's the students who don't seek the help they need that would be likely to not be certified because of the way that was manifesting in their interactions, their ability to engage in school and to be able to put them in a position.
But I certainly say at orientation, go see the counselor. You do not have to report it to the Board of Law Examiners.
Exactly.
You know, and I really appreciate what Dean Brinkley said about having faculty share with students their own struggles. And how have your faculty, is this something you've asked faculty to do? Is this something faculty have volunteered to do?
I don't, you have to be very careful that faculty's, if you will, academic freedom to relate to students in the way that they choose to is protected. And so I virtually never make a request of my faculty that they speak in a particular way. What I do is to say, I can speak on my own behalf, and I can say, to the extent that this is helpful to our students, I hope others will join me. And I just leave it at that.
You know, but you can share your own story. I mean, one I tell at orientation every year is, I didn't do well in law school when I got there. I mean, the anxiety was overwhelming. And the second Friday I was in New Haven, I packed up all my stuff out of my apartment and I put it in my car and I was coming home. It was a huge mistake to have gone to law school. But I was a polite Southerner, so I stopped to tell the dean I was leaving because I thought maybe somebody else could come. And of course he sat me down in a very nice way and explained to me I was not the first law student who'd ever had that response to law school. And I needed to give it a little more time and I needed to settle in, and if I would just try to work out a semester. If I wanted to leave then I could, but I needed to get a semester under my belt. So I went back and I unpacked, and the rest is history. I tell that story at orientation, and I say to every first year entering class, you owe me that talk. when this place gets that overwhelming for you and you just don't think you can do it anymore, come knock on my door. And every fall, 2 or 3 do. And usually I can be as comforting as my dean was to me and work through what's troubling them and get them back on a path. Sometimes I can't. This fall, for instance, I had a young woman who, after we talked, I said, I think you're right. You're not in shape to come to law school this fall. Let's defer your admission to next fall. You take this time, you get yourself healthy, and if you want to come back next fall, I'll guarantee you a spot. But so yeah, you can't make the faculty tell their stories, but you certainly can share yours. And
Well, and it's, it sounds like there's also some room for accommodation. If a student is struggling, if a student needs help, the anxious law student might assume there's no option for me.
And there are a lot of options.
There's no option for me. This is when people take drastic action because they just don't see that they're options. These services, I'm assuming, but I just want to ask, are these services available to law students without any extra cost to them at
Yes.
the law schools?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Correct.
And one thing I'd like to say about not just faculty sharing, but students who made it past the first year sharing. So our SBA, they do a lot of interactions, and it's almost like an early warning system, because we would get information, because I have a student advisory council, and we'll get information from students about students that they think are struggling to make the referral to Brett. Because I think that we're so far removed from law school, and law school is so different. So I think, for example, the first years coming in, they have the second years who did their, they did the online thing too. So I think that encouraging peer-on-peer discussions and stuff, I think is also helpful in addition to faculty sharing.
Is there I'll ask this to all three of you guys. Is there any education on the part of the universities toward the administrators or the faculty about how to notice someone in trouble?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And we have Brett at the law school, but the university has, I think, 12 maybe. They have a pretty big, and Brett sends out stuff periodically to the faculty and the students about here's the warning signs, here's what to look out for.
I think the biggest referral to our counselors from the faculty. I mean, we have any number of faculty who will immediately say, I don't think this is an academic problem with my course. I think you've got something else going on that's more serious, and I think you need to go talk to the counselor. And if the student's really distraught, professors will walk the student down to the counselor's office and sit with them until they've made an appointment and can get in to talk with her. So I think the faculty, I've been pleased with how involved the faculty is. There's one issue we've worked really hard on. I wonder if you two have seen it, but as the population of law schools swings increasingly female, we've seen a dramatic increase in reports of domestic violence by our students. I mean, some of them are in really bad relationships, and it turns out that's such a sensitive issue that we would hear anecdotal evidence from all over the building, because every law student sort of has their 1 or 2 people in the building. It might be staff, it might be faculty, it could be anybody whom they really trust. And that's who they often go talk to. And a lot of our folks were sort of overwhelmed, like, I don't know what to do with this. So, we put together a 3-professor task force about how to deal with, how to talk with somebody who comes to you with that sort of issue, and what resources are available within the university and in the community, and the next steps to take. And we've got it down to a 2-page memo we all keep on our desk, so that if when these complaints come, and the pandemic has not helped, because you have students who are now confined to a dwelling with somebody that is is not the best relationship that they should be in, and it's gotten even more problematic.
You've talked about students, things to look for in students. and certainly there are students who may appear to be struggling academically. But as we know, some of the top performing students, top performing lawyers, struggle as well. And how do you get those really top performers to think about self-care, and how do you see past, or what do you do with a top performing student, a top performing lawyer? You know, when someone has committed suicide and everyone says, I can't believe this, I'm shocked, this person was a role model. What can we do to get the top performers to think about these issues and bring them to us?
Well, I think that one of the things we haven't talked about yet is what I'll call the lemming-like quality of the law school experience. The need that students have to have the experience with peers and to keep pace with peers, and the competition that goes on between peers, which is a system that we perpetuate, that the Legal Academy perpetuates. We didn't create it. We stepped into the stream at some point, but the stream started decades ago. And I think for top performers, the addiction to praise that I described earlier is just enhanced. And what I often see is folks for whom law school was the highest experience of life. I mean, law school was the place where they got told that they were superior in some way. And then they get out into the real world, and I say this to them when I talk to them directly, this is going to come to an end. I'm very delighted for you that you are third in the class right now. I'm delighted for you that you are about to go and clerk for a federal judge after law school.
And in 2 years,
this
nobody
is
will care.
all coming to an end very soon.
Right.
And you are going to be confronted with an enormous cornfield of life and given a machete and told to carve your way through it. And the fact that you were third in the class and clerk for the federal judge isn't going to make very much difference in your ability to do that well. And I absolutely hated my first 3 years of law practice, or 4. It took me a while to find my way, particularly after a clerkship that was a complete, just nirvana-like experience for me, as I bet it was for you all. I mean,
Absolutely.
what I do with those high performers, so one thing I'm doing this year is I am teaching a 70-student section of business associations this semester. And I'm doing that for a lot of different reasons, but one reason I'm doing it is because our 1Ls had such a difficult year being remote, and I just decided they needed an in-person experience with their dean. They needed to know the school through me, and I have a practice that there's a sign-up genius, and I take 3 of them to lunch after class every single day, 3 days a week. 3 of them go with me. You can have a conversation with 3 people that's very good. I have a lot of law review students and law review editors in that class, and we have this discussion, and I try to get them off of that gerbil wheel as best I can.
And what about the top performers who aren't on law review? There are students who got to law school because they've been driven, and they are terrified. They are terrified about what's going to happen after law school because they don't have a federal clerkship. They are, I'm sure, very concerned in this economy about just getting a job. And yet our academy is training them to project confidence at all times, to project that winning personality that someone will want to hire. So how do you help someone who's worried about getting hired to understand that it's okay to say you might need some help? I understand what Dean Littard said about the accommodations that the bar has made at admissions. And then also, and I assume the pandemic may have enhanced this, then there's the competitive nature of law school. The students who aren't on law review may have a view of the students who are on law review of, I can't talk to them about my issues. They're on a different planet from me. Who's going to talk to me? I'm not,
So, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
I'm talking about you, but
No.
whenever I encounter any student, I don't really care who they are, law review,
Yeah.
not law review. What I do is sit down and look at them in the face, and I say, I want you to tell me what makes you most blissful in this world. And they'll say, whatever. Playing my musical instrument, working with this kind of person. Who cares? I don't care what the answer is. I say, that is your key for the longer haul. Forget all this grade stuff. That's going to be irrelevant very, very quickly. You need to key into that piece of who you are. And if you do, the world is going to discover you, and it's going to discover that aspect of you, and it is going to validate you, because the world needs you way worse than you need it. So they need to be given that validation by a person who is who they think knows what they're doing, which is what they think about us, whether it's correct or not. In my case, it's often not, but that's what they need.
Well, in law school, stress ebbs and flows with the economy. 2013, 2014, there weren't many jobs, and students were worried and desperate and concerned and working contract jobs. The legal economy is pretty good right now. We posted a 92% employment rate 10 months after graduation, with kids in great jobs in the middle of the pandemic. And the 8% who didn't have jobs, I could just about name why they didn't. They'd gone to graduate school, or they were starting a family, they weren't in the job market. So, and I think I certainly have, and I know you have, and we have really terrific, vigorous, well-staffed onboarding in our career services departments. I mean, we had one person at Campbell when I started. We have 4 now. Who spend all of their time with these students, and not just finding them a job, but working with them on wellness and working with them on interview skills. And I mean, we do things like, dress for success. A lot of these kids come from families where they've never worn a coat and tie. So we teach them how to do that. We take them to fancy restaurants. Many of them have never sat at a formal table setting. They're terrified about going to an interview because they don't know which fork to use. So,
we
work on a lot of those things with our career services people to try to get them in good shape to go out in the world.
But I think something to consider that we're encountering more and more is students who are in their second year and sometimes third year as to why. You like, what makes you happy? And usually it'd be something not related to law. And they're like, I'm down this path, I don't know why I'm here. So I think what we are trying to do with our life coaches in the first year, getting them to why, before they've expended so much energy and effort and money. Because I've had students in the third year saying, I'm graduating because I have to, but I'm never going to practice law. I don't like lawyers. I don't know why I'm here. And some go because their parents were lawyers, so that's why they're here. So I think that critically, before you get to even looking for a job, is why. Why are you here? Why do you want to practice law? And then also getting them to think about their law degree broadly. We have a person in our career services department that's just dedicated to JD Advantage jobs.
Exactly.
Regulatory compliance and business enterprise, and letting students know you can do anything with the law degree, even if you decide, I don't want to be, litigating, I don't want to do transaction work, and I don't want to be associated with lawyers. There's so many other things you can do with the degree.
Yeah, I think that point is so powerful.
It is.
I try to say to my students, this is the best form of professional training you can possibly invest in, and what it can do for you in the long haul. If you don't practice law a day of your life, if your bliss is playing the flute, the current CEO of the Boston Symphony Orchestra had a clarinet degree from the Eastman School of Music and a JD from the University of Minnesota. I mean, you can be a museum director, you can run a nonprofit, you can work for a bar association. I mean, the number of options is greater with a law degree than just about anything. You don't have to practice a minute of your life if you don't want to.
And your question about how do you get the higher achieving students help, a couple of things. One is the faculty know the highest achieving students. I mean, they're, because they are the highest achieving students, and they keep an eye on them. And I think they're the access point for a lot of those students when that's who they go to when they're really struggling and they're really troubled. But for them and for everyone, I think what we've tried to do so hard is to, in every way we can think of, to destigmatize counseling, asking for help. We have this screen that shows up on our public display every day, 5 paths to counseling. That these are all the things you have access to, and it tells you, you can go see the counselor at the law school. You can, if you're not comfortable seeing somebody in the law school, you can go to our main campus to the counseling center there. If you don't have time to go to the counseling center there, you can do a tele-appointment, and you can do it by video from your apartment or the law school. You can go to BarCares. You can go to the Lawyer Assistance Program. And we just flash that every day. It runs in the law school so that it just becomes, we hope, just perceived as a routine part of coming to law school. This is just something that if you feel the need, you can do it and access it.
And then when students leave, and you talked about your first 3 or 4 years of practice, and I can say that was the case for me as well. Do alumni come back to the law school for support when they are struggling? I certainly didn't. I was in another state and felt like I don't want anyone in this law firm to know I'm struggling.
I think much more than in our time, Lucy.
Yeah. Okay.
I think that there's far more of that now. Now, students who have graduated and have jobs and are miserable in those jobs and want to change often come back to our career development office.
Exactly.
That happens all the time.
Yeah.
Constantly.
Yeah, we work with our,
And we work
we,
with them.
We don't really offer mental health services to alumni. We don't have the capacity.
That's
I
what
mean,
some folks in this room do. That
Yeah,
do
we're
do
strained
that.
already to offer those to our ongoing students, but constantly our students are coming in, and law firms know that. I mean, I can't tell you how many postings we get. We're looking for an associate with 2-3 years experience. Well, none of my law students have 2-3 years experience practicing law, but we put those up, and our alumni certainly know how to access our boards and to find all that information, and a lot of them find new positions that way.
I think today more than was the case, say, in our time, students, not all, but a reasonable number of students are experiencing law school socially as a very important time in their lives. Those relationships with their fellow law students really matter to them going into their adult life. I mean, I just saw on some social media that a group of our graduates from a couple of years ago had all gotten together back in Chapel Hill. Not because of a scheduled reunion. We didn't have anything to do with it. They were just doing it themselves because they wanted to see each other, and the relationships were important to them.
Do the law schools, there are some students who need regular, sustained mental health, substance abuse treatment. Their needs are greater than the bandwidth of the services that you're offering at the law school. There's not parity in insurance coverage for mental health treatment, despite efforts to make that so. Do you provide any help to these students in navigating well, how am I going to, I need more treatment than you have here. How am I going to pay for that? How am I going to access that?
Well, again, you get into the they don't come to me with those issues because this is all confidential, but I know that my
Right.
counselors help them try to go to the next step if it's beyond what a counselor can offer. I think BarCare's has 3, and you can see a counselor free for 3 times. Yeah.
With the law schools pay for.
Yeah, we
That's
pay
right.
for that.
So-
We pay a lot of
so,
money
and
for that.
I'm on the board of BarCare.
But then the BarCare's folks will help you try to help you figure out how to transition into a more permanent therapeutic arrangement,
Yes.
if that's what you need.
Yeah, BarCare's works to identify a lawyer or a law student's insurance coverage, and then matches HRC, which is the provider through BarCare's, will look at the mental health professionals who they have vetted and approved to provide these clinical services, and find who takes the insurance of that student or that lawyer. But I would imagine that's another barrier.
Yeah.
Just the fear that I'm not going to be able to afford this.
Well, nobody's insurance covers more than, a certain percentage of this stuff that I know of.
Yeah.
I'm not aware that you can purchase
Right.
special coverage for, and often the providers are not within the networks of the insurance companies, and so, yeah, I mean, you've almost got to get in an employment situation to have a longer term set up.
Yeah. Well, one of the things, space has always been really important to me, and particularly during a pandemic, to the extent that I could get students still after school but outside, became really important. So we looked at every strategy we could come up with to try to make that happen. Free bicycles that you can check out at the security desk and take off and ride. Rows of orange rocking chairs all over the campus where you can just go sit out. Picnic tables that we put up every place we can put one, so there's a place to assemble outside. And we just built the most fabulous outdoor meeting space that you've ever seen, that is being used all the time, even in weather like, well, today it's going to be 70, so there'll be a crowd out there. But I think that's been really important. I think giving folks a venue where they can meet, socialize, blow off steam, get together with each other, has worked well, I think.
One of the things that I picked up is in talking to lawyers and planning this thing is, what are you doing to encourage in students the notion that you can have a life out of law school? While you're here in law school, you can go play tennis, you can go play golf, you can go run and go to the gym. And what are you doing proactively, rather than saying, hey, you can go play golf? Rather than saying, we're having a little golf tournament. We're starting a running club. We're getting free gym memberships for all students. What are you doing to show them you can have a life in a practice?
We give them opportunities to do. I also have Marcetta Lee, who is our Dean of External Relations. And last year she planned a 5K. It was virtual, so the students could walk when they wanted to walk, but they got medals. Brett has done some things on Wednesday. We have massage chairs. They're hiking and biking when the weather permits, and is led by Brett or maybe some of the faculty and the staff. And I think it's about seeing us, because faculty and we can work just as hard too. We can forget about it.
Okay.
So it seems it's practicing what we preach, right? It letting them see. So we gave a game night. I attended. I walked the building and sit with the students so they can see I'm not working all the time, that I'm doing a work-life balance, and just modeling that behavior.
If you have to get back to, and I hope we don't, but there was a time when you just had to have these classes remote. What have you learned at your schools can make the best of that situation? What can you do if you have to be remote?
Figure out a way to get, have reviews in person, figure out a way to do office hours in person, so still have the interaction. Even before the pandemic, we had a lot of online learning because we never closed for inclement weather or anything. We just changed courses to remote. So our students were in the mindset of remote. But I think it takes a lot from a professor to make sure that you're not, I think you have to teach a different way when you're virtual. So we train our faculty on the best practices. They go to conferences, bringing in experts. So I think that's making the best experience possible. I was at a conference, I saw somebody, I think it was from USC, and they presented their online course, and it was just like so fascinating because they had brought in makeup artists, and they had put some work into it. Because when you're teaching online, if you're going to do it well, I think it's much more difficult than teaching in person.
Hey, Lucy, I want to jump in.
Yes.
You were talking about the resources available from BarCares, and people have limitations on insurance coverage. BarCares provides 3 sessions. Nothing gets fixed in 3 sessions, so there is that limitation. Lawyers Assistance Program is there to fill that gap. They, and from experience, there are a lot of law students that are in the program. More than most people know because it is completely confidential. And so I want to make sure that Lawyers Assistance Program gets a shout out here because they provide critical resources. And the other question I had was for the deans is, to what extent do you bring in successful practicing attorneys who've been through, have hit their low point, or have had challenges that are outside? I mean, we're all sort of trained to be fixers, and a lot of us are high achievers. And in that mindset, when we head out the door of law school, when the challenges arise, too often I think we turn inside, isolate, don't have the connections that a Lawyers Assistance Program, BarCares, but I think too many law students leave law school with a sense that that's not okay to deal with. I've got this. I'm a high achiever. I'm a fixer. That's what I'm hired to do.
And having a lawyer come to your law schools to speak to students, have a lawyer, a judge, to say, I had a problem. Yeah. I had a serious problem. And guess what? My life was not over. I got help. And the Lawyers Assistance Program, yes, I do want to mention that because it's different than BarCares. BarCares is provided to members of the North Carolina Bar Association. The Lawyers Assistance Program is provided by the State Bar, which is the licensing agency for attorneys. But it is completely separate from licensing and disciplining of attorneys. And the Lawyers Assistance Program uses peer counselors. These are lawyers and judges who have themselves gotten help. And I believe the Lawyers Assistance Program does provide referrals for very short-term counseling, for crisis counseling, or you have some clinicians in your office who are helping people. I will say that the head of the Lawyers Assistance Program helped me find help for one of my children who had a very acute and very urgent need, just through the network of lawyers who have struggled with any number of issues. And it's a fraternity, sorority, fraternity, whatever, brotherhood, sisterhood of professionals. Am I missing anything more about Lawyers Assistance Program? Because I do want to.
Kind of probably hate to call it a fraternity or a sorority, but
Secret society.
Yeah.
It's not.
Well, it's confident. I would say, you know what? It's a connection. It's a connection with other professionals who have faced the challenges of everyday life.
And these
And,
people
you know-
know your profession, so these, like, I know what you're worried about, because I've been there.
And, you know, Lewis, making, you know, this is what this facility was designed for, and provides some supplementary care as well.
Right.
They do a very good job at it.
I would tell you that most people in our space that work as counselors are in recovery themselves. You know, so much of what we learn that when we share with our clients is not something you can learn at school. I mean, we all go to school, we get certified, but it's usually our experience that really grabs the attention of the people that we're talking to, much to what you're talking about. If you see somebody and you feel like you're like them, and you hear that they've successfully tackled this issue, it gives you some confidence. And it also gives you, I think, the permission to be honest. You know, and that's the most important thing. I mean, the most important thing for all of us in this space is honesty. That's the thing that seems to be missing. So I applaud all you guys for having the conversation at the start of the careers, because one of the dreams of people in our space is that we're always reactive. We're usually coming in at a crisis because there's a problem. If we could ever get in front of the issue instead of always reacting to it, we would be way more successful at stopping some of the damage.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Josh.
That's kind of a segue. I have a question for the deans. Dean Brinkley, you talked about stepping into the stream, you know, and a lot of the talk is around, I wouldn't say reaction, there's definitely a lot of proactivity around mental health. But I'm curious, is it even possible to put things in place to divert the stream or change it? And what I mean is, I'm not saying something radical, but obviously the nature of law school being so competitive where it is, on a curve, stepping into it, you know, are there things that can be done within from changing maybe a culture or something that's stepped into that leads to extra stress into the
Well, I think the short answer is yes, but it's not going to happen because the three of us make it happen. It's going to take a massive effort by the entire profession. Mm-hmm. And I'm particularly talking about the way that law students get hired. Hiring law firms basically skip over in some ways, and I was a practicing lawyer for 22 years and interviewed a lot of students. They skip over the hard work and the risk of hiring someone who may be an absolutely outstanding lawyer by relying on a GPA and a resume. Mm-hmm. And until that ends, it is impossible for any of these three schools to get out of the business of grades. I've told our faculty, we're going to have a faculty vote later this semester about whether we want to look at the grading system of the law school. And I say that, and you know, Kelly just quivers for fear because she has to run our career development office, and what is that going to do if we decide to take a look at the grading process? The problem with getting rid of a grading system is it's going to get replaced with some other kind of grading system. It doesn't, just because you don't have A, B, C, D, F, you're going to have some version of that. And schools that claim not to have grades are not telling you the truth. They've got a grading system.
Well, yeah, they have a ranking, because I think Yale doesn't give grades, Northeastern doesn't give grades, but they have a ranking system, because that's how people graduate with honors from there.
Yeah.
But I will say about that is, I think first you're going to have to change the legal academy itself, because it's not just the way that students are hired, it's the way that professors are hired. So we keep the whole hierarchy of, you know, from who gets on the Supreme Court to who, you know, when you go on the market, we call it the meat market, and everybody's competing. And the pressure is so intense, because I know a few years ago, a professor at, I think, University of Vermont committed suicide, shot herself in the head out about, you know, tenure and promotion. And so I think before it can trickle down to how do we stop students from being so competitive, how do we stop even the competitive hiring within the legal academy itself? So I think that it starts at the top. I think we have to figure out, and then I'm on the advisory board for U.S. News and World Report, That's a big problem because everybody says we don't care about rankings, but when I listen to that meeting, what they're trying to do is how are we going to game the system?
Exactly.
You know, what variables are you going to put in? And I say until we start being honest and saying that we have to stop ranking people at every level, then we can't eliminate grades or competitive because the system is set up like that on every particular level.
And I'll say something that, will be probably completely outrageous. Kelly knows it gets bad. Yes, you look at her, she's scared now. She can't take it anymore. Law faculty are people who do love teaching. They do love doing their scholarship. They want to be in the academy for very good reasons. But there's an unspoken reason why many law faculty are in the academy, which is the academy is the place that validated them at the highest possible level, and they want to return to the place that made them feel best about themselves.
And they don't want the validation test changed.
And then
Anyway.
and
There you go.
and maybe they don't feel validated out in the world, doing other things. I wanted, Macon used the word honesty. Dean Lewis, you just used the word honesty. And fundamental to the legal profession has got to be honesty. Our legal system only works if people are honest. Lewis, you mentioned what I would call performance-enhancing drugs and the risk of law students and lawyers using performance-enhancing drugs. Not to take the edge off, perhaps, as we think of some impairment, but to actually enhance their performance. And where does the legal profession's, value of honesty come into conflict with someone who's feeling like they need to help themselves in that way? Because I think for a lawyer, for a law student, the worst feeling would be to feel like I'm not being honest. And that's a giant thing to carry in and of itself.
Well, if you want me, I tag team on that, because I think what we see here is you've got a certain percentage of the population that's either predisposed to addiction or in active addiction, and it's somewhere between 10 and 15%. We're not exactly sure who or how many of those people are. And if you've got those people, and that would assume that population also exists in law school. So if you've got that situation in law school, then you've got a population of folks who, if their buddy or their friends, they see their friends, let's say, doing those things they shouldn't be doing, and they do it, they're going to go off the rate. There's some people that actually can take Adderall and Vyvanse and Ritalin the way it's prescribed.
Right.
I don't know the many people who come through this program that can do that, or they'll, because if in my mind as someone in recovery, if one is good, 10 are better. Drinks, pills, whatever they are. So you run the risk of those again, they come in from these high schools and colleges, but they were top performers there. They get in there, they don't realize they've got this problem until the pandemic hits, or they have all these issues that pop up with them, for their mental health issues. Then they turn to those items because their friends are doing it, and all of a sudden they're off to the races. And you may end up losing folks, I think, because we've seen them come through here, people who are desperate, who have been really, really good. So this is the other part that I think that I've noticed over the last few years that we've been able to piece together. The folks who come to our facility are high-functioning adults. These are people who really, really have knocked it out of the park in one area of their life, whether it's being an entrepreneur, whether it's being a lawyer, or a physician. And they think that somehow because they have this debilitating disease called addiction, that they can just tackle it on their own. And because they've done so well in this other area, and it doesn't translate over.
Physician heal thyself.
Bingo, and it does not translate over just because you've been, and here the grading system out here in the real world is money and prestige, and you got to, and so that keeps people, I think, it's kind of the same way it looks like to me in law school. I was a political science major who actually thought for 10 seconds about being a lawyer. Very few people know that.
You still can't.
I was a horrible student. I loved drinking and doing drugs a whole lot more than I loved studying. And I did it much better than I studied. But I think that's what we see and hear, and that's what I think is going on in the laboratory known as law school, and in school in general.
Right, and Dean Brinkley, you talked about addiction to praise, and I guess in the real word, it's addiction to money and prestige.
Promotion and status.
Status.
Bob,
Status.
Status and ego, yeah.
Actually, Dean, Bob, let the dean behind you speak. She hadn't had a chance yet, yeah.
I have friends in law, not law, forget law school, undergrad, who are dealing with young people who have addiction to gaming. I don't game, I don't understand gaming, but that they started in high school. Now they're in college, and parents not understanding have allowed their high school students, they're clueless that they were staying up all night gaming and getting all these points and etc. And I know we haven't mentioned that, but if it's happened in college, some of those students are going to be going to law school, med school, MBA, and all of that. It's that I'm just throwing like 10 years from now, will we be having conversations on this issue for students,
Yes.
and professionals?
Oh, I do have a 13-year-old.
Playing
games.
Thank you.
Fortnite.
The gambling apps and all of that is so accessible. I'm told, like I say, I don't quite understand gaming, I don't pay any at all. But I'm listening to other people at undergrad level saying that is a real problem, that parents didn't even understand there really were issues in high school.
Well, I'll tell you, one of my favorite students told me recently that she just left her boyfriend because he liked Fortnite more than he liked her. Yeah. So she just got tired of being in second place. And I have a 13-year-old son, so I know all about gaming and trying to keep an eye on it and watch it. But yeah, it does follow right up, I think. Now, for a lot of folks, it's just recreational. I mean, it's just a way to blow off steam for an hour or so at the end of the day, and that's fine. You know, but you do have to watch it because it's got addictive capacities.
They refer to those as process addictions. Gambling, gaming, Nikki, what about that? Pornography, sex. But very few, I say that, there are a group of folks who we see who have both the drug alcohol addiction and these process addictions that they kind of are tandem. And they'll turn one off at some point and and the other one will ramp back up again, then they'll turn the other one on at some point. And again, it goes back to this, there's a certain percentage of the population, they're not sure exactly, but it's somewhere between 10 and 15% of us who have always have that predisposition to that. I know there were whole years I didn't drink. But when I drank, it was to get drunk, and I did it incredibly well. But I could turn it off when it behooved me. And unless it's addressed, it just kind of lays dormant there until it's acted on.
Is the pandemic particularly, just tailor-made to foster internet addiction?
It's the perfect storm. You got isolation is the breeding ground for addiction. It is the absolute breeding ground for it. You got when we have folks come to us, and we've had several attorneys who come to us, and we know that they are drinking in their basements, or they're addicts, or when families go out of town, they go to the beach house, and they're coming. We know the end is near because they're.
Hey. I'm one of the clinicians with the Lawyer Assistance Program, and since you brought up the pandemic, I thought I could talk a little bit about that and the impact that we've seen. We provide free and confidential services, as you mentioned, to any judge, lawyer, or law student in the state indefinitely. There's no limit to the amount of time you can work with people. But with the pandemic, we saw a huge spike of referrals for law students. I think you guys have talked about the isolation, the difficulty with the time periods that you've had to have remote learning, and it's worked out even to the point where we decided one of the silver linings of the pandemic is the virtual access to therapy. Mm-hmm. So we've actually started a law student support group
for any law student that want, and we've got participants from every single law school in the state. So that's been kind of cool to see that everybody's kind of having a similar experience no matter where you're at school, and to have a safe place to talk about anything under the sun that's been going on in your life that you want to bring to the table for support. And we've been able to get access, thank you Tacker for bringing us up. Certain schools have been able, UNC in particular, I'm going to be there in 2 weeks I think. We often go in and bring some of our volunteers that are lawyers who have come out the other side of dealing with a mental health issue to share their stories in the class. So that's been happening a lot more frequently, and I think that's very impactful to see another lawyer up there that says, you know what, I had these problems too, and here I am out the other side being successful and with both my mental health and my life. And it's been a great experience. So I also feel like we were talking about the performance enhancing drugs. I think the thing to remember, what we see, is that alcohol is the main offender, really. It's the easiest, you know, everyone is 21 for the most part, and it's the most socially acceptable thing. Most of the high achievers are not also going to be super high risk takers when it comes to illegal substance use. So, not to say that we never see it, we certainly do, but the mass majority, it's alcohol. And it's really much more of a slow burn with professionals, I find, and with law students, that it takes a while for them to reach their bottom. And so being able to access help earlier is so helpful for them to be able to learn that whatever they're using to cope in an unhealthy way, a way of avoiding the stress that they're dealing with, is not going to be serving them down the road. So we've seen that for sure with lawyers and law students being able to come in sooner than later.
Have lawyers and law students, this is reminding me of, you know, one silver lining of the pandemic that I've seen in some groups is you have a group that usually meets and maybe 40% of the people show up. And then 100% are showing up virtually because they don't have to leave their home. And in the case of seeking treatment and seeking help, they can just do it from the comfort of their home. Do you think you're seeing more people seeking out the help because they can do it so conveniently?
I feel like our numbers are generally pretty consistent. However, our support groups are certainly overflowing. So because they can just do it in their office with their door closed, or some of them will, you know, go sit in their car for their lunch break and do our support group meetings virtually. That has been, and we do intend on continuing to do some of them virtually, even when we go back to in-person meetings full time.
And some of the lawyers that live in hard to get places that we don't have support groups, in the far western part can now participate.
Yep. And with law students, our support groups in the evening, so that way hopefully they're able to navigate it during their law school schedule.
But we have an evening program, so.
That's true. That's true. We deal with both, so it's been.
But I had a question for you though. When bringing out people to talk, is that diversity in the representation? Because I know in communities of color, that's an added layer that we don't tend to ask for help, even if you remove the stigma. And I think we see that a lot at our law schools. So if we could see diverse people in the program saying we went through, I think it would be helpful for us to.
Absolutely, we definitely look for that when we're having people come in.
You know, I just wanted to share very quickly, I know we're at the tail end of the conversation, at the Wake County Bar, an initiative that I, want to get started with our executive board. We are the most diverse board ever with, as far as history. We're an all-female board, and something that we're incredibly proud of. As females of color, and particularly with this most recent death of Chesley Christ, it's been very difficult for us to process, what we're seeing with our peers and what we're seeing in the profession. And as women of color, attorneys of color, there is that added stigma in a way of seeking help because you are that shining example of the community. you know, your first generation everything, and you know, it's, you know, you're addicted in a way to that sort of craze. So what we decided to do as a board is we're each going to go through the BarCare's program. We're going to write an article, you know, about our, you know, just about our experiences with it, how easy it is, you know, how accessible, how important it's been for us professionally and personally. And we're going to make it a series in our bar flyer. But we're the leaders, and so we need to lead, you know, by example. We need to normalize this, especially for attorneys of color within our profession, who I know are struggling. But you know, we have that same, you know, we have these added pressures not to get the help that we know, you know, we need. And so we're very excited about it, and you know, we'll be writing in the bar flyer about our experiences, and you know, I think it's going to be a great service to our bar.
Yes, Bob. Knowing from experience, having been to the precipice a couple times, that I now have, through my doctors, developed coping skills. And so I'm wondering, do your students know they're going to have your problem solved or addressed, but then on the other side, it's going to be a positive experience to help you deal with the specific stressors that are causing a binge drink or whatever happens to be? My question is, do students recognize I'm not just going there for a Band-Aid or to get help, they're going to teach me how to deal with these things?
Well, I mean, that's reminding me of positive psychology that Brett Bowers mentioned, and I think that if you have an accomplished attorney or a law professor, you know, talking to students about their own experience, it's kind of self-evident that they figured out how to cope. And I don't think I've ever heard anyone say, I'm going to tell you the story about myself, and then I'm going to tell you that that's completely behind me, and it's all been cured. Like, nobody uses the word cure in mental health treatment. I don't know. Brett may have something better to
I'll do my best
respond to that.
So every case is different, you know, what it looks like, and also the severity or the scope of it. A lot of times we'll have clients coming in and they say, hey, help me deal, help me cope, right? And we can do a little bit of that, right? But there's an important thing that happens for many of them. It's a mindset thing. It kind of goes back to Dean Brinkley's lemming idea, right? This perfectionistic, how do I maximize my time, maximize my resources, right? And so you get into conversations with people about that, and it's like, oh, what? I can't maximize anymore. Now what? And so part of it is just sort of getting those gears grinding, you know, sort of thinking about things in a different way. Coping might look very different on the other end of the therapy experience from what they thought it might be kind of going into. It's a difficult thing to communicate. And the first challenge is just simply getting folks in the door to get help. But that sort of arc of therapy looks very different for people.
I think it's important to remember that alcohol and addiction are not like a broken leg. They're more like diabetes.
Yes.
You manage it, you learn the coping skills, but you can't cure it necessarily. And so I think it is all about learning life skills, ways of working with your peers and your family and friends to manage this disease.
And I can piggyback on what Brett was saying is that one of the things that we praise so often when law students get help is that we're trying to shift the perspective so that it's not this, we're just going to power through and push through attitude and I just need to handle it all and keep on moving, as opposed to Well, what happens then is that I get lawyers 10 years in that are falling
We
apart
all do.
because they've been pushing through, and that's not sustainable. So when law students are coming to get help, we're able to show them and encourage them and saying, like, you're getting those tools now so that when you enter the practice of law, you're gonna be so much more prepared than your peers. Because you're gonna have those coping mechanisms in place that we're gonna help you to develop.
And then they come back to us and we say, push through, push through.
I want to be sensitive to time because I think that I wouldn't be surprised if these law school deans don't have to be teaching and getting somewhere. And also, one thing I do like in the Zoom world is we can say, we're going to end on time. If you want to hang around,
Right.
I'm going to hang around. I don't have to be there right this minute. Some of us do. If you want permission to leave because you are only going to be here until 10 o'clock, you have permission. But we can stick around. But I just wanted to thank all of everyone who's here, whether you're listening or talking. It means a lot. It means a lot to me as someone who was years ago feeling like who would I ever trust to tell that I'm struggling, to see people doing this. So thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody. Go to therecoveryboys.com. This show will be posted quickly. Terry, our crack team here, will make sure that it's out. Terry's amazing. And we will see you again next week on the Recovery Boys. Lewis?
Thank you, Megan.
Thank you, Lewis.
I will
And
see
Will,
you
thank
next
you, buddy.
week.
All right, thanks so much.
guys.
Good night, everybody.
Mama, take this badge from me, 'cause I can't use it anymore.